The orbit decayed 3 degrees every hour. Davin Marsh knew this because he'd been watching the readout for 6 hours, and because he had nothing else to do except watch readouts and breathe recycled air, and think about the decision he'd made 4 days ago that had taken everything from him. The station's observation bay was a curved glass bubble bolted to the underside of the threshold commercial platform, and from it you could see the whole arc of the planet below, blues and whites smeared together like something a child had painted, too beautiful to be real, too far away to mean anything. He pressed his palm against the glass. It was cold. Everything up here was cold in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. The auction had been held in Bay 7. He hadn't meant to be there. He'd been running a diagnostic on the docking clamps, his actual job, the one the Verk Shipping Consortium paid him 1,700 credits a month to do, the one that was supposed to last 2 more years and then buy him enough to start a life somewhere with actual gravity. And Bay 7 was adjacent to the clamp array, and the sounds coming through the bulkhead were wrong in a way his body understood before his brain did. Not mechanical wrong, not pressure seal wrong. Crying wrong. He'd pulled the access panel and looked through, which was against regulations in ways that could end his contract, and he'd seen the cage. The Keth did not call themselves slavers. They called themselves brokers of relocation, which was a phrase that required 4 of their jaw segments to pronounce correctly, and which their translation chips rendered in standard with the careful neutrality of something trying very hard not to have an opinion. The Keth were tall, bilaterally symmetric in a way that fooled humans into a false sense of recognition, until you noticed the secondary set of manipulator limbs folded flat against their thorax like a secret they were keeping. Their skin was the color of old copper and ran in vertical ridges down their necks and arms. They smelled, faintly and persistently, of ammonia. There were 3 of them in Bay 7. The cage was standard commercial livestock, polycarbonate framing, air filtration recycled from an agricultural model, 2 square meters of floor space occupied entirely by a girl who sat with her knees drawn to her chest and her ears flat against her skull. The ears were the first thing Davin registered. Long, mobile, pointed at their tips, tracking sound the way a compass tracks north, rotating slightly even now toward the Keth's clicking speech, processing, flinching. Her tail was wrapped around her ankles. Her fur, he registered it as fur, fine and silver gray, covering her arms and face and the backs of her hands, was damp. She'd been crying for long enough to be past the sound of it, past the heaving, down into that hollow, silent place where the body still produces tears, but the mind has gone somewhere else to wait. She looked about 16 in the ways that mattered. Her eyes, when they caught the bay's worklights, were gold with vertical pupils, and they were very still. The Keth were laughing. It was a sound like gravel in a blender, their version of it, and they were making it because one of them had reached through the cage bars with a manipulator and pulled her tail. Just pulled it sharply, the way a child pulls a dog's tail, not to cause maximum pain, but because it could, because nothing in this bay would stop it. And she had made a sound, a high involuntary cry that she immediately tried to swallow. And then she'd pressed herself into the far corner of the cage and wrapped her arms around her knees, and the tears had come back, and the 3 Keth were laughing. The one who'd pulled the tail said something in Keth speech. The translation chip in Davin's ear rendered it, responsive, good muscle tone. Minor cosmetic damage from transit, but buyer allowance is standard. The second one said, the ears add value, novelty premium applies. The third one, the one with the datapad, tapped something and said, reserve price confirmed. Auction opens in 40 minutes. Do you expect competing bids? The first one laughed again and said, for a live Felorian, there will be 6 buyers minimum. Felorians are almost gone, that's why they're worth something. Davin's hand was still on the access panel. He was 31 years old. He had 7,200 credits in a savings account on Ceres Station. He had a work visa that expired in 14 months. He had a mother on Earth who called him on Sundays, Martian Standard, and who still thought he was going to come home and do something with his life. Her words, something that meant she could tell the neighbors about it. He had a friend named Tomas back on Callisto who owed him 400 credits and a really good pair of magnetic boots. He had nothing that could help. He let go of the access panel and stood in the corridor for 11 seconds. He counted them. Then he went to find the bay supervisor. The bay supervisor was a human named Fenwick, who had been on the threshold platform for 9 years, and had achieved the particular institutional blindness of someone who has decided that everything difficult is above his pay grade. He was a compact, careful man who kept his workspace extremely tidy, and his opinions extremely small. "Bay 7, Davin said. Fenwick looked up from his screen. "What about it?" "There's a girl in a cage in there. Commercial transit, licensed under Consortium Bylaw 7 Delta. I don't have jurisdiction over licensed cargo." "She's not cargo." "Mr. Marsh." Fenwick said the name the way people say names when they want to end a conversation. "The Keth hold a Class 3 commercial permit issued by the Outer Trade Commission. Whatever is in Bay 7 is their business and their liability. My job and yours is the clamp array on Deck 4. I would very much like you to go back to it. The Outer Trade Commission's Intelligent Species Protections do not apply to species not yet registered under the Sapience Index." Fenwick turned back to his screen. "Felorians haven't been assessed, probably won't be given current numbers. Mr. Marsh, Deck 4. Davin went to Deck 4. He sat with his back against the clamp housing and pulled up his savings account on his personal pad. 7,216 credits. He opened the Outer Trade Commission's public pricing database and searched for Felorian. The last recorded sale price had been 4 years ago, 11,000 credits. The database noted in small text at the bottom of the entry, "Population status, critical. Estimated surviving population, fewer than 200 individuals. Breed rarity premium, variable, currently estimated 40–60% above base rate." Davin did the math. It took him about 4 seconds. He went back to Bay 7. The auction worked like this. The Keth had a portable bidding platform, a half-sphere of polished dark metal that sat on a folding stand and connected to the Outer Trade Commission's licensed marketplace network. Buyers could bid remotely. The 3 Keth managed the process with the bored efficiency of people who do this often and find it neither interesting nor troubling. Davin walked in through the main bay door. The Keth nearest the door turned to look at him. The translation chip rendered its words as "restricted area. Authorized personnel only." "I'm Davin Marsh," he said. "Deck maintenance threshold platform. I want to register a bid." The Keth looked at him with its compound eyes, which had no pupils and therefore no readable expression. Then it looked at the other 2 Keth. A brief exchange of clicks. "You are human." "Yes." "Humans are buyers, occasionally. You have credit registered with the OTC marketplace." "I can register now. It takes about 30 seconds. He held up his pad. The Keth made a gesture with its upper manipulators that the translation chip didn't touch, some Keth expression with no standard equivalent. Then it said, "Bidding opens in 12 minutes. Register if you choose." Davin registered. The girl in the cage had tracked him from the moment he walked in. Her gold eyes followed him across the bay without blinking. He didn't let himself look at her directly for more than a moment because he was afraid that if he did he would do something operationally counterproductive, like try to pull the cage door off with his hands. He looked at his pad instead. He entered his account information. He waited. 6 remote bids came in during the opening window. He saw the numbers. His stomach went quiet and careful the way it did before bad news. The highest opening bid was 9,400. He had 7,200. The bidding moved fast. Davin had expected this intellectually, and it still felt like being hit. Each bid notification on his pad was a small detonation. 9-5, 9-8, 10-2. The Keth with the datapad watched the numbers with visible satisfaction. Davin had learned to read Keth physical expression in the 2 years he'd been on platforms that handled Keth cargo, and satisfaction in a Keth looked like a very small loosening around the jaw segments, like they were getting ready to eat something. The girl was watching the platform. She could read the display numbers from the cage. Davin realized this when he saw her eyes moving with each bid notification. She understood what the numbers meant. He put in his first bid at 10-2 using everything he had, 7,216 credits. The system flagged it immediately. Bid rejected. Current high bid exceeds available balance. He stared at the screen. Then he opened his communications app and called Tomas on Callisto. Tomas picked up after 4 rings, which meant he'd been asleep. Davin, what? I need 400 credits. Silence. Then, what time is it? I don't care what time it is, Tomas. The boots were 600 and I only ever asked you for 4 back. I need them right now, right this second, transferred to my OTC account. Right now. Are you in trouble? I am not in trouble. There's a girl. I need the 400. More silence. Davin could hear Tomas sitting up, the particular sound of a bunk mattress under a man who weighs 90 kilograms. Davin, the girl you've been seeing. Not that kind of girl. Tomas, please. The transfer came through in 45 seconds. 7,616 credits. Bid 7,600, rejected. Current high 10,300. He stared at the gap, 2,700 credits, and it might as well have been a canyon. He thought about his mother, about the call he'd had to make if this worked, and the call he'd have to make if it didn't, and the job he was definitely losing either way because he'd left the clamp array unattended for 37 minutes and Fenwick was the kind of man who noticed. He thought about the 2-year plan and the savings account that was now going to be either empty or merely inadequate. He thought about the sound she'd made when they pulled her tail. He called the Threshold Platform's duty medical officer, a woman named Dr. Reyes who he knew from the common mess, and who had once, at a platform holiday function 3 years ago, lost 40 credits to him in a card game, and who had said at the time, laughing, that she owed him 1. Dr. Reyes, it's Davin Marsh. I need to borrow 2,000 credits. A long pause. It's for something important, he said. How important? He told her about the cage. He told her about the ears and the tail and the gold eyes and the Keth with the datapad and the laughing and the 12 minutes and the number 2,700. Dr. Reyes was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, I'm transferring 1,500. That's what I have liquid. I want it back. You'll get it back. I know I'll get it back, Davin, because you're a fundamentally decent person who's going to have absolutely nothing left after this. 1,500. 9,116 credits. The bidding was at 10,500. He had 5 minutes left. He thought about who he knew on this platform. He went through the list fast and brutal, the way you go through a supply inventory when you're low on something essential. Who has what? What do they owe me? What can I say in 30 seconds that will make someone transfer money to a stranger's account? He called 6 people. 2 didn't answer. 1 said no immediately. 1 said yes for 300. 1 said yes for 200. 1, a cargo handler named Pell, who Davin had covered 3 shifts for when Pell's daughter was born back on Mars, said yes for 1,000. 9,616 credits. Bidding 11,200. 2 minutes. The girl was watching him. He'd stopped pretending he wasn't looking at her. She was watching him tap at his pad and make calls, and he didn't know if she could hear both sides of the conversations, or just his side, or if she understood any standard at all. But she was watching him with those gold eyes, with the stillness of someone who has learned not to hope for things because hoping makes it worse when the thing doesn't happen. He thought about that look. He thought about what it cost to learn to wear that look. He had 9,616 credits. He had 60 seconds. He called the platform's chief engineer, a taciturn man named Akafer who had never once in 4 years said anything to Davin that wasn't functionally related to maintenance schedules, who ate lunch alone and had never attended a platform social function, who was widely considered to be either deeply antisocial or deeply private, depending on who you asked. Davin had asked once about a photograph on Akafer's workstation. A girl, maybe 12, sitting on what looked like the steps of a house somewhere with actual trees, grinning at the camera with the uncomplicated joy of someone who hasn't learned yet what the world can be. Akafer had said, "My daughter, she's 14 now. Doesn't smile like that anymore." And then he'd gone back to his schematic and not said anything else. Davin called him. "Akafer, I know this is insane. I know you have no reason to say yes. There's a girl in a cage in Bay 7, and I need 1,700 credits in 40 seconds. I know what I'm asking." Silence on the line. Then Akafer's voice completely flat. "What species?" "Felorian." Another silence, briefer. "Sending 1,500, it's what I have available. Don't tell me what it's for, Marsh. I know what it's for." The transfer hit. 11,116 credits. Bidding, 11,200. Davin bid 11,100. Rejected current high, 11,200. He bid 11,116. Rejected. He was 16 credits short. He stared at the screen. 16 credits. The number was so small it was almost funny. He had scraped together $11,000 from 7 people in 4 minutes, and he was 16 credits short of making a bid and 600 short of being in range anyway, because the current leader was at 11,200 and climbing. He looked at the girl. She was still watching him. She'd seen the rejected bids. Her tail had stopped moving. She'd understood what the stillness in his face meant, and she'd gone somewhere else again, the way she'd done after they'd pulled her tail, that hollow interior distance that was the mind's last line of defense against things it cannot change. Something went very quiet in Davin's chest. He turned to the Keth with the datapad and said, "I want to register a service contract." The Keth looked at him. A human can register a personal service contract with an OTC buyer as a credit supplement to a purchase bid. Bylaw 7 Delta, subsection 12. It's standard. I know it's standard because I spent the last 4 minutes reading the OTC buyer's manual while I was making calls. He held up his pad where he'd pulled the relevant section. I'm offering a 36-month service contract with terms to be negotiated at point of sale. Current market rate for skilled platform maintenance in the outer trade routes is approximately 800 credits per month. 36 months at 800 is 28,800 in contract value. I'm offering that as supplementary bid credit against my available balance. The Keth with the datapad was very still. The other two looked at each other. You would indenture yourself, the datapad Keth said, to buy the Felorian. Yes. Why? Davin thought about the look on her face when she'd gone away into that interior distance. He thought about Akafer's daughter, who didn't smile like that anymore. He thought about his mother on Earth who thought he was going to come home and do something with his life. Because somebody should, he said. The Keth processed the service contract offer for 70 seconds, which Davin spent standing very still and breathing carefully. He'd read the bylaw. It was real. He wasn't sure if they'd accept it. The Keth were experienced brokers, and they had remote bids still coming in, and a live auction premium already established. A service contract from a human platform worker was worth less in their margin calculations than a clean credit transfer from a registered buyer. But the clause existed because the OTC had written it to prevent a specific kind of scenario that they'd found politically inconvenient: humans bidding to buy back humans. They'd extended it to non-human buyers after a legal challenge 40 years ago and never revisited it. Davin had read through the clause twice, fast, while talking to Akafar, and it said what he needed it to say. The datapad Keth clicked something that the translation chip turned into. Contract valuation confirmed at 28,800 standard credits over 36 months. Combined with available balance of 11,116, total bid value is 39,916. The current remote high bid was 11,200. Davin's combined value was 3 times that. Bid accepted, the datapad Keth said, with the tone of something recalculating its priorities. You are now high bidder. The 60-second closing window ran. No one matched him. The hammer, a small tonal chime from the bidding platform, anticlimactic in the way of all the things that change your life, sounded in Bay 7. And Davin Marsh owned a service contract he'd be paying off for 3 years and no savings account and no 2-year plan and no particular future. And the cage door was opening. She didn't come out immediately. He hadn't expected her to. He stood back near the wall, while the Keth filed their transfer documentation with the professional efficiency of people for whom the emotional texture of a transaction is genuinely irrelevant. The cage door was open, and she was still sitting with her knees to her chest, watching the open door, and her ears were moving, rotating toward him, toward the Keth, toward the door, processing. He sat down on the floor. Not toward her, just down, cross-legged, with his back against the bay wall and his hands in his lap and nothing in his posture that said he was waiting for anything specific. He'd had a dog when he was a kid, a black terrier mix named Bishop that his mother had gotten from a shelter, and Bishop had been terrified of everything for the first 3 months. The trick, his mother had said, was to not ask anything of him. Just be in the room. Let him decide. He sat on the floor. The Keth finished their documentation and left without acknowledging him, which was fine. The bay door sealed behind them. It was very quiet. After a while, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5, he wasn't counting, there was a soft sound from the cage. Careful feet on the cage floor. A pause. Then a longer pause. Then she was sitting next to the cage door, just inside the frame, with her tail wrapped around her feet and her ears at about half-mast, and her gold eyes on him. He didn't look up right away. He looked at his hands, then at a point on the floor between them. He said, "My name is Davin, I work on this platform." He said it conversationally, not toward her, just into the air of the bay. "I fix things mostly, clamp arrays, pressure seals, atmospheric processors, nothing exciting. I was born on Earth, which is a planet, probably not helpful. Lots of things are planets. It's the one with the single moon, if that helps. Blue and white from space. Looks like a marble." He paused. "I don't know if you can understand me. The translation protocols for Felurian are supposed to be in the OTC database, but I haven't had a chance to look them up. If you can't understand me, I'm just talking to myself, which I do anyway, so." He shrugged. Occupational hazard of working alone. A sound. Very small. Almost not a sound, more like the absence of a previous sound ending, a slight shift in the quality of the silence. He didn't look up. She said, in standard that was accented strangely and clearly learned rather than native, vowels compressed and consonants bitten off at the ends, "I understand." He nodded once, like this was routine. "Good. My standard isn't always clear, so let me know." Silence. "Then you bought me." "Yes." "Why?" He thought about the various true answers. Because someone should. Because the look on your face was the worst thing I'd ever seen in a room where I happened to be standing. Because Akafar's daughter doesn't smile like that anymore, and I couldn't do anything about that, but I could do something about this. He thought about which version of the truth was useful right now. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said. "I don't have a plan past this. I have a service contract with the Keth that's going to take 3 years to pay off, and I don't have a job anymore because I abandoned my post, and you can't stay on this platform because the Keth still hold transfer rights and they could sell those rights to someone else. So we need to figure out somewhere to go that has better laws. I'm working on that part." He finally looked up. She was in the doorway of the cage, not quite out, one hand on the frame, her whole body in the posture of something that could retreat instantly. She was looking at him with the gold eyes, and he looked back and didn't make it into anything. She said, "You spent everything." "Yes." "For me." "Yes." She was quiet. The ears moved, one forward, one tracking sideways, then both forward. Something working in her face that he didn't have the vocabulary for yet. She said, "My name is Saya." He said, "Hello, Saya." He sat with her for a while after the Keth left. Not saying anything, not doing anything particularly, just present in the bay, occupying the same air, letting the quiet be what it was. She came fully out of the cage eventually. One foot, then the other, then she was standing in the bay with the cage door open behind her and nothing between her and the rest of the station. And she stood there for a moment with her ears tracking in a slow, careful arc and her tail low and still, taking it in. She was taller than she'd looked. The cage had compressed her. Standing, she came to about his chin, and her proportions were different from human proportions in ways that weren't dramatic, slightly longer in the forearm, wider in the shoulder relative to her waist, and the tail and the ears changed the geometry of how she occupied space, the ears adding to her height, the tail to her apparent width. She moved, when she moved, with an economy that made human movement look faintly wasteful, each motion beginning and ending exactly where it needed to. She walked to the porthole. She put her hand against the glass the way he had, not knowing he'd done the same hours before, and looked out at the curved brightness below. She stood there for a long time. He didn't say anything about what they needed to do next, about the calls he had to make, about Fenwick and the job and the transport question and the legal status question. Those were real and urgent, and they would be just as real and urgent in 20 minutes. Right now, she was looking at something that might be the first horizon she'd chosen to look at in however long she'd been in transit, and he didn't have anything more important to do than let her look at it. After a while she said, without turning, "Is that where you are from?" "Yes." "I have never seen it." "It looks better from up here," he said. "Closer you get, more complicated it is." She was quiet, then, "Mine too was." He let that sit. She turned from the porthole eventually, and her ears came forward, and she looked at him with those gold eyes, and she said, "What happens now?" The night station night, which was a dimming of the overhead lights on an 18-hour cycle, came and went. Davin made 2 calls. One to Fenwick to receive his formal termination, which Fenwick delivered in exactly the words he'd expected, and one to a labor broker he knew on Meridian Station who handled OTC-registered service contracts and who had occasionally mentioned, in the vague way of someone who finds human interest stories entertaining, that there was strong demand for skilled platform workers in the outer reaches where the labor pool was thin, and the pay was actually better than consortium standard. The broker, whose name was Carver, and who had the voice of someone who had been in commercial logistics long enough to find everything mildly funny, listened to Davin's situation and said, "So you have a service contract with the Keth that you need to have honored by a registered employer so you can legally transfer jurisdiction. A Felorian national whose status under the Sapience Index has not been assessed, no current employment, and you're on a commercial platform in low Earth orbit with no immediate transport." "That's accurate," Davin said. "I have a maintenance contract on Vila platform," Carver said, "the outer Jovian system." Pays $1,400 a month, which is below what you're worth, but the Vila Compact has full OTC Sapience registration on Felorians. There was a colony there, brief but long enough to establish legal precedent. She'd be a protected person there, not cargo. Can you flag the Keth contract as a labor transfer? I can do it by morning, Carver said. Which morning? This morning. I really do find you people entertaining, Carver said and hung up. Saya slept in the bay. Davin got a sleeping bag from the emergency supply locker and offered it to her, and she accepted it and curled into a corner. Not the cage corner, a different corner, the one farthest from the cage, with her tail over her face and her ears tracking even in sleep. He sat against the wall with his pad and his cooling cup of coffee, and did the math on the Vila contract. $1,400 a month, his debts to Rays and Pell and Akaffer, and the others totaling approximately 2,800 credits, his balance now sitting at 16 credits exactly. He thought about calling his mother. He decided to do that in the morning, after Carver had sent the paperwork through, after he had something coherent to explain. He looked out the small porthole set into Bay 7's outer wall. He could see the limb of the earth from here, just barely, a curved brightness at the edge of darkness, blue-white and patient. When he was 6 years old, his father had taken him up onto the roof of their building in New Auckland in the middle of the night to watch a meteor shower, and his father had said, "You know those aren't really falling, right? They just look like falling. They're actually arriving." And Davin had thought about that for years afterward without being sure what to do with it. He thought about it again now, the way things look like one thing and are actually another. He thought about a girl in a cage in low Earth orbit being not cargo but a person, and a cage door being not a conclusion but a beginning, and everything he'd spent on a stranger being not a loss, but the only thing in 4 years on this platform that had felt like something he'd chosen to do rather than something that had happened to him. He thought about how far away Vila was. He thought that it might be far enough. Saya spoke standard in the careful, slightly compressed way of someone who'd learned it as a second or third language from imperfect recordings, and she spoke it rarely for the first few days, not from mistrust, Davin thought, but from habit. The habit of silence that you build when speaking up has reliably made things worse. He didn't push. He talked to her the way he'd talk in an empty room, functionally and without demands, and gradually the empty room started talking back. The transport to Vila took 11 days on a Carver-brokered berth aboard a consortium cargo hauler called the Indefinite Margin Asterisk. It was not a comfortable ship. It smelled of machine oil and the specific staleness of recycled atmosphere that has been recycled one too many times. Their cabin had 2 bunks and a porthole the size of a dinner plate. The ship's crew was 4 humans and a gory navigator who communicated exclusively through a wall-mounted translation terminal and appeared, as far as Davin could tell, to be continuously contemptuous of everyone aboard, including itself. On the first day, Saya stayed in the cabin almost entirely. He brought food from the ship's common galley, whatever was available, which was not much, and brought it without comment and left her to eat or not eat as she chose, and did not ask how she was. He sat on his bunk and read maintenance manuals for outer-reach platform models he'd never worked on, because the work ahead was different from the work he'd been doing, and he had 11 days to get ahead of the gap. He could hear her, occasionally, small sounds, the shift of the bunk, the tail against the metal wall, the breathing that was slightly faster than a human's resting rate but was slowing, day by day, toward something easier. On the second day she asked him to leave the cabin light on when he slept. He said okay. He left it on. On the third day out she asked him what a mortgage was, because he'd used the word when talking to Carver on a follow-up call, and he explained what a mortgage was, and she said it sounded very complicated, and he said that it was, and she said that on her home world before the Keth came her people didn't use currency. They used a system of obligation recording that was maintained by the community's memory keepers. And the obligations passed between families across generations, so that everyone was always both creditor and debtor to everyone else, and the whole thing was essentially held together by the community's collective decision to honor it. He said that sounded a lot like a mortgage, actually. She was quiet for a moment. Then she made a sound he hadn't heard from her before, short, low, the faintest possible exhalation with something in it that was not quite humor but was adjacent to humor, the way a scar is adjacent to a wound. Maybe, she said. He found himself careful after that about which moments to say things in and which to let pass. She had a rhythm to her speech, not slow, not hesitant, but deliberate, each thing said after whatever internal process determined it was the right thing to say. It was a patience he recognized from working on complex mechanical systems, the kind that wouldn't give you anything useful if you rushed it. On the fourth day they sat in the common corridor for an hour because the porthole in the common area was larger than the one in the cabin, and she could see more from it, the stars mostly, but occasionally one of the traffic lanes, a distant convoy running its lights in the dark. She didn't say anything. He sat nearby and didn't either. On the fifth day she asked him about the service contract, what it meant in specific terms, what he was obligated to do and for how long, and he explained it clearly without making it sound smaller than it was. 3 years of his labor at market rate, registered with the OTC, the Keth technically his employer of record with Vila platform as the practical site, a legal sleight of hand that Carver had navigated with the cheerful precision of someone who has found all the gaps in a bureaucratic system and furnished them. The Keth received payment. He received wage. The difference was a transfer credit that came out of what the platform paid him and went somewhere else. She listened with her ears forward and her eyes tracking his face. When he finished, she said, 3 years. Yes. That is a long time. It is. She was quiet. Then, my community memory keepers would record this as a multi-generational obligation. He thought about that. You don't have to. I know, she said. That is why I am saying it. Vila platform was built into the Jovian Trojan asteroids, a cluster of working stations and service habitats strung together along the gravity-stable points of Jupiter's orbit like beads on a string. And it smelled of coolant and rock dust, and the particular mineral sharpness of regolith in zero-G processing. And it was loud in a constant industrial way, and it was full of people from 17 species doing the grinding. Unglamorous work of keeping the outer reaches supplied with the things that kept people alive. The gravity was 0.7 standard, which took getting used to. Everything felt slightly lighter than it should, and Davin's inner ear spent the first week filing complaints that his brain overrode one by one. Saya adapted to the gravity faster than he did. She adapted to most things faster than he did. The ears helped. She was processing the platform's acoustic environment constantly, building a model of it in real time, knowing where things were and what they were doing before she looked at them. On their second day she told him which corridor had a pressure differential developing in its secondary air system, which turned out to be accurate. On their fourth day she told him which loading bay had a fastener assembly running out of spec from the sound pattern it was making, and the bay supervisor had looked at her with the expression of someone recalculating, and then gone to check, and found the fastener assembly running out of spec. He found he spent a lot of time watching people recalculate Saya. The platform director was a 4-armed gory named Isavith, who processed Davin's labor transfer documentation in 11 minutes, and Saya's protected person registration in 22 minutes, and gave them both a brief orientation in a voice that was professionally neutral and comprehensively efficient. At the end of the orientation, Isavith said, "Your work assignment starts in 8 hours, Mr. Marsh. The gory's upper arm gestured toward Saya, can register for community skills assessment tomorrow. We have 3 other Felorian residents if she wants contact. Saya's ears came fully forward for the first time since Davin had known her. 3, she said. Yes. Survivors from a Keth transit that was intercepted by an OTC enforcement patrol 14 months ago. They've been here since. Good workers, all of them. Isavith looked at both of them with the compound-eyed patience of someone who has seen many kinds of difficult situations and found most of them manageable. Any questions? Davin said, "Which way is the mess hall?" He was on a maintenance shift when he got the message from one of the Felorian residents, a male named Orcs who had been on Vila for 13 months, and who had a way of communicating in standard that was direct and slightly formal in the way of someone choosing each word with care. The message said, "She told us what you did. I want to say thank you, but I don't think that word is the right size. I don't know the right size word in standard. I'm told it doesn't exist." Davin read the message 3 times while he was lying under an atmospheric processor on level 6, with a pressure wrench in his hand. He sent back, "Your welcome is probably too small too, but I'll take it." He went back to the atmospheric processor. The problem was a worn gasket in the recirculation manifold, simple enough, the kind of repair that took 20 minutes once you had the right part and got into position. He'd done it 100 times. He'd done it without thinking in low Earth orbit and in the main belt, and now here in the Jovian system, with the gravity at 0.7, and the light coming through the work panels slightly wrong, yellower, the sun being very far away now, and the sound of the platform around him in its constant industrial voice. He thought about what it meant for a word to not be the right size. He thought about the translation chip in his ear, and all the things it turned into standard that didn't quite survive the journey. He thought about Saya's compressed vowels and bitten consonants, standard that was learned at a distance from a recording of a language that had itself been recorded at a distance, standard that had passed through 3 or 4 filters of interpretation before it reached her. He thought about the obligation record and the community that had been almost gone before the Keth came for them, and was now represented in this system by 4 people. He finished the gasket. He moved to the next item on his maintenance list. The work was the same out here as it had been everywhere else. That was one of the things about infrastructure maintenance. It didn't change with the location. Bolts were bolts. Pressure was pressure. A seal that failed the same way in the Jovian Trojans as it did in low Earth orbit. There was something almost meditative about it, the sameness, once you stopped wanting it to be different. You could get your mind very quiet inside a maintenance task, in a way that felt like rest, even when the work was hard. He thought, lying under the atmospheric processor, that he hadn't been able to get his mind quiet like this in the 2 years on the threshold platform. There had always been the plan, the 2-year plan, the savings account, the figure he was working toward, the future he was trying to build toward like a destination. Always the sense of being in transit toward something real, this not yet being real. He wasn't in transit anymore. He was here. Vila platform, the Jovian Trojans, 0.7 gravity and yellow light and a gasket he'd just replaced properly, and Saya with her ears forward finding cracks in load-bearing structures before the scanner did, and Orcs with his formal standard, and his message that said the word wasn't the right size. It felt tentatively like a place. 2 months in, Davin got a call from Dr. Reyes on the threshold platform. He took it in his cabin after his shift, still in his coveralls, sitting on the bunk. She looked tired. Platform medical officers always looked tired, but there was a specific quality to her tiredness now that he recognized as something other than workload. She said, "I heard through Carver that you made it to Vila." "Yes, got here about 6 weeks ago." "How is she?" He thought about how to answer that accurately. "Better," he said. "Getting better. She's found some other Felorian residents here. That's helped a lot." Reyes nodded. She looked at something off-screen for a moment. "I told Fenwick, you know, after you left, what was in Bay 7. "I know. Fenwick told me during my termination call." He filed a report with the OTC Enforcement Division. I don't know if anything will come of it. The Keth have good legal coverage and the Sapiens Index issue is real. There's no registry obligation without the assessment, and the assessment process takes years. She paused. But it's on record now. That's something. It's something, she agreed. She looked at him then directly in the particular way of someone who has decided to say the thing they called to say. How are you, Davin? He thought about it. He thought about the atmospheric processor and the obligation record, and Saya sitting at the common area porthole, watching a convoy's running lights in the dark. He thought about the maintenance list, and the 0.7 gravity, and the 1,500 credits he still owed her. I'm actually okay, he said. She studied him. You look it, she said, which is strange given everything. I know. I want my 1,500 back eventually. You'll get it. I put you first on the repayment schedule. She laughed briefly, tired. Take care of yourself out there, Marsh. You too, Dr. Reyes. She ended the call. He sat with the dark pad in his hands for a moment, and then he pulled up the repayment schedule he'd actually built, Reyes first, then Pell, then Akafer, then the others in order of amount, and checked the timeline. At current salary with basic living costs deducted, he'd clear the last personal debt in 8 months. The Keth service contract ran longer, but that was a different kind of number, a structural thing rather than a personal one, and he'd stopped feeling it as debt and started feeling it as just the shape of the next few years. He had been a person with a 2-year plan. Now he was a person with an 8-month repayment schedule and a 3-year service structure, and a maintenance list that never got shorter, only different. He wasn't sure this was worse. He was not sure it was the same kind of thing at all. 3 months in, Saya tested into level 3 status on Vila's Community Skills Registry, which meant she was certified to do structural assessment work. A designation that the platform director delivered to Davin with the mildly surprised tone of someone whose estimate of something had been exceeded. She reads structural stress patterns faster than our scanner array, Isavith said. Not instead of the scanner with it, cross-referencing, finding things the array misses. She hears them, Davin said. Excuse me. The stress patterns, she hears them. Felorian auditory range covers infrasound frequencies, subsonic structural vibration. She's been hearing the building groaning for 3 months. She just needed the certification to do something about it. Isavith looked at him for a moment with the compound-eyed stillness that Davin had learned meant the Gory was updating its model of a situation. Then it said, How do you know this? She told me, Davin said. We talk. 6 months in, Oris brought him a recording. Formal, the way the Felorian community did formal things. Both hands held forward, head dipped slightly. A small chip drive, the kind that stored audio. Memory keeper recording, Oris said. What she asked for, what we made. Davin took the chip. He listened to it that night in his bunk. It was in Felorian, which he didn't speak, but Saya had sent him a translation through Vila's language service, typed out and attached. He read along as the recording played, the 2 streams running together. It was not a thank you. It was not a story. It was an obligation record, the kind the memory keepers had maintained before the Keth came, the kind that passed between families across generations. It named Davin Marsh of Earth. It recorded what he had done, not narratively but as a formal accounting, what he had spent, what he had risked, what he had given. It recorded the obligation his community, what remained of it, held toward him. The last line, translated, read, This is recorded so that it will not be forgotten, and so that what was done in the dark of low Earth orbit, where no community was watching, will be known by those who come after and added to the accounting of what humans are. He set the pad down on his chest and looked at the ceiling of his cabin. The Jovian Trojans had no visible stars, the asteroids were too dense, the light scatter too high, but the ceiling had a texture to it, if you looked long enough, a pattern that wasn't quite random. He'd been looking at it for 6 months, and he'd found 3 places where the texture formed something almost like a shape, the way clouds form shapes, the way randomness occasionally assembles itself into the ghost of an image before dispersing again. He thought about being 31 years old. He thought about being 31 years old with no savings and no 2-year plan, and a maintenance salary that was below consortium standard in the outer Jovian system. He thought about these facts clearly, and without the particular flinch he'd expected them to carry, and found they were just facts, present, acknowledged, not threatening. He was not the person who had the 2-year plan anymore. He wasn't sure exactly when that had happened, not in Bay 7, he thought, or not only in Bay 7. Maybe on the transport on the 5th day, when Saya had said, "I know. That is why I am saying it," and something in him had understood, not intellectually but in the way the body understands things, that some transactions don't have a ledger. Or maybe it had been earlier, on the roof with his father, watching things arrive that looked like falling. He thought about his mother calling him on Sunday. He thought about what he was going to tell her. He started composing the call in his head. "Mom, I know I said I had a plan. The plan changed. Here's what happened." He could hear how she would sound when he told her, not disappointed. His mother wasn't a disappointed-sounding person. She was a what-comes-next person. She'd always been. And he could hear what she'd say, which was probably, "Are you okay?" and then, "Tell me everything," and then probably nothing for a while as she processed it, and then probably, "You always did have to do things the hard way." She wouldn't be wrong. He realized he'd been afraid, slightly, all these months of the call, of explaining the gap between the plan and what he'd actually done. Not because she'd be angry, she wouldn't be, but because explaining it meant saying it out loud to someone who knew him, and he wasn't sure he had the right words for the kind of thing it was. He wasn't afraid of it anymore. He had a word now, or the shape of one. The obligation record had given it to him, even in translation. What was done in the dark of low Earth orbit, where no community was watching, will be known by those who come after. Not heroism, not sacrifice, the way that word usually meant. Just the thing you do when you happen to be the person in the room and there is something to be done. He picked up the pad and started writing. 7 months in, he got a message from HFY. Not a call. HFY wasn't a calling person, just a brief text through the platform relay system, which added about 4 hours lag each direction, and therefore had a certain gravity to it, the gravity of things said slowly across distance. The message said, "Heard from Carver that you landed somewhere good, glad to hear it. The platform is the same. Fenwick is the same. I looked up the Felorian assessment process. The OTC is backlogged, but there's a xenolinguistics team out of Triton doing preliminary work. Might be 5 years, might be less. Thought you should know." He sent back, "Thanks for the 1500, HFY. I'll have it back to you in 4 months. HFY sent back 3 hours later, the lag making it feel almost like a pause for thought, though it wasn't. "Keep it. Call it even for the clamp arrays." Davin stared at this for a while. Then he wrote, "The clamp arrays were my job." HFY wrote 4 hours later, "Yes. And what you did in Bay 7 was yours too, accounts balance." He didn't reply to that one. There wasn't anything to add to it. He updated the repayment schedule, removing HFY's line. Then he sat looking at the shorter list and thought about how an account balanced, what that meant when the ledger wasn't currency, what the memory keepers would have said about it. He thought about the obligation that passed between families across generations and held together, because communities decided to honor it. He thought that humans did this too in their way. Not always, not consistently, but sometimes in the dark between one person and another, with no community watching and no record being kept, sometimes they did. 8 months in, Davin was eating in the mess hall when Saya sat down across from him with her tray, and her tail curved around the chair leg and her ears at the relaxed, slightly tilted angle he'd come to recognize as normal for her. Not the tight flat angle of the cage, not the taut forward angle of alertness, just relaxed, tracking the ordinary sounds of the mess hall with the mild ambient attention of someone who is comfortable in a place. She said, "I found something in section 12 today." Yeah. Resonance pattern I hadn't seen before. I flagged it for full assessment. What did the scanner show? Prefracture fatigue and a load-bearing strut. 18 months out from failure, probably. Maybe 14, if the next Jupiter alignment goes the way orbital mechanics says it will. She ate something from her tray. Isavith said if it had gone undetected another 4 months, there would have been no good repair window. Good catch. She looked at him with the gold eyes, which he had learned a lot about in 8 months. The vertical pupils were relaxed now, fully dilated in the mess hall's moderate light, and there was something in her expression that had not been there in Bay 7 on the threshold platform, something that was not quite yet what you'd call ease but was moving in that direction, had been moving there for months, steadily and without announcement, the way things move when they are not being watched. "There are 12 people in section 12, she said. "I know." She looked at him a moment longer, then she looked down at her tray and ate something else. "Davin," she said. "Yeah. Is it strange to feel glad about being here?" He thought about it. Outside the porthole wall of the Villa mess hall, Jupiter hung in the dark like a slow orange eye, the bands of its clouds running horizontal and ancient, a planet that had been there before there were people to look at it and would be there after. He thought about the threshold platform in low Earth orbit and a girl in a cage, and the sound she'd made that had come through the bulkhead like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known he had. "No," he said, "I don't think so." He ate. The mess hall was loud and warm and smelled of industrial processing and gory spices, and the coffee substitute that everyone on the platform complained about but drank anyway. Orcs was sitting 3 tables over with 2 of the other Felorian residents, their ears moving in conversation, tails easy. Saya said, not looking up, "The obligation record was updated this week. Orcs told me. Whenever a Felorian leaves this platform and goes somewhere else, they take a copy, in case they find others, in case there are others who need to know." "What does it say?" "What it said before," she said. "Plus, he is still here, which is the next thing a record says after the first thing." He thought about that. He is still here. The record growing by 1 line, 1 month, the slow accumulation of the ordinary kept promise. He thought about how long 3 years was. He thought about how long 3 years wasn't compared to some other measurements. "Okay," he said. She looked up, the gold eyes, the ears fully forward now. "Okay," she said. Outside, Jupiter turned. On the day the service contract completed 3 years, to the standard day, marked in the OTC database with an automated notification and no particular ceremony. Davin was 300 meters inside Vila's primary asteroid, replacing a seal on a coolant junction in the dark with a headlamp and 2 wrenches, and a can of expanding sealant foam that smelled terrible but worked perfectly. His pad buzzed with the notification. He read it. He set the pad down on the asteroid rock beside him, cool and gray and 3 billion years old. He finished the seal. He packed his tools. He climbed back up the access shaft into the working light of the platform, and he sent his mother a message that said, "Got some news. Call me Sunday." And then he went to the mess hall because it was dinner and he was hungry, and Saya had said she was trying to figure out how to make something approximating the spiced grain dish her community had eaten at important occasions, adapted from what was available in the Vila stores, and she'd said it probably wouldn't be right, but that the point was trying. The mess hall smelled of something warm, not quite right but close. He sat down across from her, and she put a bowl in front of him and her ears were forward, and her tail was moving in the slow rhythm that he had learned, over 3 years and 8 months of daily proximity, was the rhythm of something that might be called contentment, not happiness, which was too bright a word but its quieter neighbor, the the thing that lives next door to happiness and keeps the lights on. Well, she said. He tried it. It wasn't quite right. It was something else. Something that had never existed before and would not exist anywhere else, because it was made from what was here and who had made it and everything that had led to this moment. It's good, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, with the gold eyes and the ears, and everything 8 months had become, and then 3 years had become. Yes, she said, it is. Outside, Jupiter turned, and the asteroid field caught the light of a sun that was very far away but still, across that distance enough. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the mess hall was thinning out, and the long station night was beginning its cycle through the overhead lights, Davin walked back to his cabin along the level 3 corridor, which had the particular sound of a platform settling into its quieter rhythms. The maintenance systems cycling down from peak load. The deep structural hum that Saya had told him was the asteroid itself, the rock that the whole platform was anchored into, conducting the ambient vibration of its own slow rotation. She heard it all the time, she'd said. She'd heard it from the first day. She'd found it comforting, the way you find comforting a sound that has no intention in it, a sound that is simply the world being what it is. He stopped at the porthole at the end of the corridor. Jupiter was there, as it always was, enormous and unhurried, the storms in its atmosphere running their tracks in bands of orange and cream and brown. He'd looked at it enough by now that it had stopped being dramatic and become simply a fact, a neighbor, the big one, there when he looked up the same way a mountain was there when you looked up from a valley. He thought about the 16 credits. He thought about them often, not with regret, not exactly, but with a kind of amazement at the precision of the thing, the way the universe had arranged it so that he was exactly 16 credits short of making the bid the ordinary way, and had therefore been required to offer something else entirely, something that turned out to be the rest of the next 3 years of his life. He wondered sometimes if he would have done it the same way if he'd had 17 credits instead of 16. If he would have bid and won, and paid cleanly, and arrived at Vila without the service contract, without the structural thing that made the next 3 years what they became. He thought he probably would have. He thought it wasn't about the 16 credits in the end. He thought it was about Bay 7, and the sound through the bulkhead, and the particular way a person looks when they have learned to stop hoping because hoping makes it worse. He thought you didn't need to be out of options to do the right thing, but it helped to not have many. He went to bed. He slept well, the way he'd been sleeping since Vila, in the 0.7 gravity with the platform's voice around him, and the memory keeper's record updated somewhere in the community's keeping, and the repayment schedule growing shorter line by line. He slept without the particular tension of a person waiting to arrive somewhere. He was already here.